You will never win an argument if you start by proving the other person wrong. It sounds counterintuitive, but it's one of the most common mistakes people make. The moment someone feels directly challenged, their brain shifts into defense mode. At that point, they're no longer listening to understand you. They're listening to fight back. That's exactly why the agree first technique is so powerful. Instead of immediately disagreeing, you begin by acknowledging a part of their perspective. For example, you might say, "I see what you mean, and from a certain angle, that actually makes sense." A simple sentence like that can instantly lower tension and make the other person feel respected. Only after that do you gently introduce your perspective. But I think there's another side we might want to consider. This kind of approach helps you avoid coming across as confrontational. Instead, you position yourself as someone who is exploring the truth together with them. The psychological effect is clear. When people don't feel attacked, they become more open to what you're saying. And when you stay calm, you naturally gain the upper hand in the conversation. This technique doesn't make you weak, quite the opposite. It shows that you're in control of your emotions and the situation. And sometimes, the person who wins isn't the one who talks the most, but the one who knows when to step back in order to move further ahead. If you say, "You're wrong," the argument begins. But if you ask the right question at the right moment, the argument can end on its own. This is one of the most subtle techniques. Instead of attacking directly, you guide the other person to see the gaps in their own reasoning. The method is simple, but highly effective. When someone presents their opinion, don't rush to disagree. Instead, ask something like, "So do you think that applies in every situation?" Or, "If that's the case, how would it work in this scenario?" These questions don't feel aggressive, but they force the other person to think more deeply about what they just said. The strength of this approach lies in a basic human tendency. People are more likely to believe in conclusions they arrive at themselves. When they start to hesitate, contradict themselves, or struggle to answer, they'll begin to notice the flaw without you needing to point it out. At the same time, asking questions helps you maintain the image of being calm and rational. You don't need to argue loudly, yet you still control the direction of the conversation. In the end, the winner isn't the one who talks more, it's the one who asks better questions, because the right question can quietly dismantle even the strongest argument. How you say something matters just as much as what you say. In an argument, changing just a few words can turn a confrontational statement into one that invites agreement. A common mistake is using aggressive phrases like, "You're wrong," or "That makes no sense." These don't just irritate the listener, they push them into a defensive position where they feel the need to protect their viewpoint at all costs. Instead, use softer language that still holds your ground. For example, "I see it from a slightly different perspective," or "There might be another way to look at this." These phrases don't directly reject the other person's idea, but they create space for your perspective to enter the conversation. You can also strengthen your message by using words that imply clarity and objectivity, such as "in reality," "clearly," or "it's easy to see that." When combined with gentle prompts like "don't you think," or "would you agree," you subtly guide the listener toward your line of thinking without putting pressure on them. Words are not just a tool for communication, they're a strategy. When you learn to choose them wisely, you don't need to raise your voice, yet people will still lean in and listen. When a single argument isn't strong enough, you can overwhelm with volume. Information overload is the technique of delivering multiple facts, examples, and pieces of evidence in a short span of time, making it difficult for the other person to keep up and respond to each point. This isn't about rambling, it's about being focused, rapid, and structured. To use it effectively, prepare 3 to 5 key points in advance, each supported by a clear piece of evidence, data, real-life experience, or relatable examples. As you present, connect them smoothly. First, second, finally. A steady, confident pace, without hesitation, creates the impression that you fully understand the subject. The psychological impact is powerful. When someone has to process too much information at once, it becomes nearly impossible to counter everything. They're forced to pick one point to respond to, while you still have several backup points to maintain control. At the same time, the density of information makes you appear more knowledgeable and credible. That said, don't overuse it. If your information is inaccurate or poorly organized, the effect backfires quickly. Make sure every piece of evidence is directly relevant and supports your main argument. Used correctly, you don't need a long debate. One strong wave of information can be enough to tilt the entire conversation in your favor. If you want your argument to sound both clear and persuasive, remember one simple principle: always group your ideas in threes. The human brain naturally finds patterns of three more satisfying, memorable, and convincing. 1 point feels too thin. 2 points feel incomplete. But 3 creates a sense of balance, structure, and logic. Instead of speaking in a scattered way, organize your argument into 3 main points. For example, I think this makes sense for 3 reasons. First, second, and finally. This structure doesn't just make it easier for others to follow. It also makes you appear more prepared and in control of the conversation. The effectiveness of this rule also comes from rhythm. When you say first, second, third, people subconsciously anticipate a conclusion, and when you land on that third point, it feels complete, as if the argument has naturally reached its end. That sense of closure reduces the listener's urge to push back. Another benefit is focus. Limiting yourself to 3 points forces you to choose your strongest, clearest ideas instead of overwhelming the conversation with too much information and losing direction. In arguments, talking more doesn't mean winning. Sometimes just 3 solid points, delivered the right way, are enough to make people nod in agreement. Every argument has a decisive moment, and if you recognize it at the right time, a single sentence can be enough to end everything. This is the final line. Not long, not emotional, but aimed directly at the weakest point in the other person's argument. A common mistake is continuing to talk when you already have the advantage. The more you say, the more likely you are to expose flaws in your own reasoning. Skilled communicators don't stretch out a win, they close at the right moment. When you notice the other person repeating themselves, avoiding questions, or losing logical consistency, that's your cue. An effective final line usually has 3 elements. It's concise, clear, and non-aggressive. For example, if that were true, then why doesn't it apply in this case? Or, so doesn't that contradict what you just said? These statements don't need to be loud, but they leave very little room for a reasonable response. What matters most is your tone. If you sound emotional or frustrated, the impact weakens. But if you speak slowly, steadily, and with certainty, it creates a sense of closure, as if the conversation has naturally reached its end point. When used correctly, you don't win by saying more, you win by saying the right thing at the right moment. And sometimes, an entire argument is decided by just one sentence. Not every argument is worth winning. And sometimes, the strongest skill isn't sharp reasoning, it's knowing when to walk away. It may sound counterintuitive, but stepping back at the right moment doesn't make you weak. It shows that you understand your own value and refuse to waste energy on conversations that lead nowhere. The first sign is when the discussion shifts from logic to emotion. When the other person starts raising their voice, making personal attacks, or repeating the same points without listening, it's no longer a debate. You're in a confrontation. And in that state, no matter how right you are, they won't accept it. The second sign is when the original purpose gets lost. Maybe you started the conversation to clarify an idea, but it slowly turns into a battle of who wins and who loses. At that point, the direction is already off track. Continuing will only make things worse. Knowing when to stop doesn't mean losing. You can end the conversation with a neutral statement like, I think we both have our own perspectives, and I'll leave it here. This keeps things respectful while allowing you to step out of the cycle. Smart people don't need to win every argument. They choose which ones are worth engaging in. Because in the end, it's not about how well you speak. It's about knowing when silence protects your position better than any words ever could.